All right, new BC assessment values are in. Lower mainland real estate values fall as northern BC values rise. So the latest BC assessment figures that Surrey detached homes fell in value by an average of 6%, while detached homes in Prince George rose in value by 3%. Let's get into this article. So yes, BC assessments are now in. You can look up your own BC assessment on the BC assessment website and putting in your address. Pretty much most homeowners across the lower mainland, including myself, can expect decreases in the assessed value. It says here ranging between minus 10% and 0%. 10% drop in BC assessment is pretty large. So it says here overall value of lower mainland properties fell to 1.92 trillion on July 1st, 2025 from almost 2 or just over 2 trillion on July 1st, 2024. So this means a total value of properties in BC fell 90 billion. But it also says here that the 2025 figure includes 24 billion worth of new builds and subdivisions. So the value of properties that existed in 2024 was $114 billion greater than the same properties on July 1st, 2025. Property values the BC assessment comes out on January 1st, but the assessments are taken on July 1st of the year prior. So the biggest drop in BC assessments were actually in White Rock, 9% in White Rock to an average of 1.58 million, almost 1.6. So the average values were previously over 1.7 million. So a gigantic drop. Detached homes in small and expensive university endowment lands, Enclave, the city of Langley, and Richmond all dropped 8% on average. Holy smokes, that is a big drop in Richmond and the city of Langley. In Surrey, detached homes fell by 6%, an average of 1.464 million, while in Vancouver, the drop was 5%, an average of 2.092 million. There were some areas that did stay relatively flat. It says here that Whistler and Hope reported not much change. Squamish was an outlier, reporting a 2% jump. Shout out Squamish. So these are all detached. If we're looking here at condos, Surrey had an average drop of 7% for their condos, 6% drops in Richmond and White Rock. Richmond and White Rock are getting hammered. And then Vancouver condos fell on an average 3% to an average of $772,000. And this article is all about comparing the Greater Vancouver area, the Lower Mainland, to the North Central region. And it says here the North Central region includes 70% of the province by landmass, not by population, but values there rose as high as 15% in some communities. They're saying this is mainly because of the stability in the markets, which from last year, whereas the markets down here in the Lower Mainland have been fairly unstable. But look at the values of some of these properties, eh? So the average value of a detached home in Fort St. James rose 14% to $244,000. $244,000 for a detached home. And that's 14% higher. And then Hazelton values rose 10%. Prince George had gains of 2% for detached homes, which is way smaller than those two areas, but $460,000 for a detached home. And then Prince Rupert had gains of 3%. On the island and the southern interior, the ranges of BC assessment have dropped around 5%. Oh, looks like it's between minus 5% and plus 5%. So you have some negative values and then some positive values, which is interesting. On the island, the value of a detached home in Victoria rose by 1%, while the central island locations such as Ladysmith, Lake Cowichan, Duncan, Parksville all had modest increases of between 2 and 4%. Wow, that's pretty far cry from what's happening here in the Lower Mainland. If you're looking at homes out in Nelson, detached homes saw an average increase of 3%. No changes in Castlegar. And this is nice to see here, a 30% increase in the assessed values of the homes in the fire-ravaged Lytton region. If you guys remember the Lytton fires, that was pretty scary. This is really nice to see. So this is the part that I want to get to. So Steve Saretsky says that the difference in valuation between the Lower Mainland and Northern BC, which is a delta of, over 20% in some areas, is likely due to a lag effect. He says the city is always the first to move, either up or down, and the outlying areas will follow. As an example, he says here that the condo market in downtown Vancouver dropped 10% over the past year, and then properties in traditionally more expensive west side areas of Vancouver are also down 10%. So by this line of thought, it looks like he's saying that eventually the prices in those outlying areas will eventually come down, and potentially, over a long enough time scale, Vancouver is going to make a rebound. But Remax Greater Vancouver housing market outlook for 2026 predicts housing prices will continue to fall this year, noting that real estate investors are almost non-existent in Vancouver right now. So why exactly do investors matter? First of all, when investors step back, we see the biggest drops in investor-friendly units, in condos. So we typically see the softness in the market there first, is when investors step out. Right now, they're not saying that there are no buyers, just that the buyers are much pickier. So they're able to negotiate harder, ask for a lot of credits, and really take their time to make sure they can get exactly what they want. So now that there are no investors, I say no investors, now that there are very few investors that are very active in the Vancouver market, what replaces them? It will mainly be purchasers that need to move based on life events. Maybe they're downsizing. Maybe they need to sell because they're having a new kid. Maybe job change and they have to move elsewhere. These are not buyers that are looking for quick returns, which totally changes the pace of the overall market. This doesn't mean that there are no buyers. It means that the power has shifted to the purchasers that need to move. And these purchasers tend to be more patient end users, people that will actually live in these homes. There's not a lot of things that would cause upward pressure in price moving into 2026. There's a lot of things that are pretty scary when it comes to the 2026 housing market, whether it comes to international market or the level of uncertainty in our local markets. It does seem like 2026 could be a very rough or slow year for housing transactions and sales. And a lot of people always bring up Bill 44. So Bill 44 makes it so that you can build a higher density development on single family lots, whether or not the city allows it. It totally overrides what the municipalities are able to do as far as controlling density. And it says here, this indicates that the provincial government's Bill 44, which overrides municipal powers to allow high density developments on single family lots, did not lead to increased lot values or great interest from developers. So I thought this one was really interesting. I thought Bill 44 would totally increase the value of these properties. And this one was a little bit surprising for me as well. I thought Bill 44 would totally increase the property values of these, one single family homes that you can build, a laneway home and have 2 basement suites in them, which would totally increase the rental potential and what you can actually do with the home. So here are a few reasons why it potentially didn't lead to an automatic increase in value. I think one of the main ones is it did not mean that you can automatically build all these grand things on these single family lots. Just because they changed zoning doesn't mean that it's automatically feasible. You still need to get the permits. You have construction costs, which are also rising. You have financing, you have approvals. So things don't happen overnight, obviously. And just because the zoning allows it doesn't mean that the home is that you're able to do these types of projects on these lots. And these developers follow their own margins, not what all the headlines are saying. So if absorption rate is low and there's very few sales, they're not going to be investing a bunch of money into these projects, especially while financing is really high. So these developers are still remaining cautious even if there's more density available. And another reason we may not have seen it show up on this year's assessments is that these big policy changes don't show up right away in the numbers. This was only one assessment cycle, and the way that the municipalities have adopted the Bill 44 and adjusted their OCPs, their official community plans, these big policy changes will happen slowly, not within one cycle of BC assessment. So we may see these changes come up in the coming couple years. So the bottom line with the Bill 44 stuff is Bill 44 can expand what is possible, but doesn't mean it will automatically become profitable. And then it says here, the RE/MAX report states that the market has shifted to a point where potential buyers are able to secure accepted offers subject to sale of their existing home. Traditionally in Vancouver, the buyer with the fewest conditions usually wins. And yes, that is totally true. The fewer conditions you have, the more certain that you're going to win, especially in multiple offers. But it is good to see that buyers are getting offers accepted with a subject to sale. Oftentimes, especially in busier markets, as soon as a seller sees a subject to sale on a buyer's offer, which means that the offer is accepted only if they are able to sell their current home, these types of offers usually don't play well in busier markets. So this is a really good temperature check of how the market is actually doing. If these subject to sale offers are getting accepted, that means there's way fewer competition and these sellers are getting desperate to work with a buyer to sell their home. This also means, I mentioned the pace of transactions will slow. This is also a good sign that the pace will slow even more because yes, you have an accepted offer, but now you need to wait for this other person to sell their home. And then that buyer may need to wait for another person to sell their home. Suddenly you have a chain of subject to sales and not a lot is happening except waiting. It is very good if you're a buyer though, because it does mitigate a lot of your risk because you don't need to worry about selling your home and then not finding anything and being homeless in between, or also committing to a purchase and then suddenly you're stuck with 2 mortgages that you likely can't even afford. So conditions on, or like these subjects and conditions on an offer are not a weakness. It's just a sign that buyers have more leverage and can negotiate harder. And then the report states that in general, market conditions in 2026 are anticipated to follow with trends similar to those seen in 2025. So what this means exactly is that we're going to see limited growth. That doesn't mean that there's going to be no opportunity. There's actually going to be a lot of opportunity for buyers that are able to take action in this market. Upsizers, if you're looking to get into a more expensive product, you're going to see some really steep discounts right now and have lots of time to find the right home and negotiate the terms that you want. So the opportunity becomes more a change in strategy. But when the market slows down like this, you can expect different segments of the market to react very differently. So a brand new 2-bedroom in a very desirable neighborhood, very renter friendly, good sign of long-term growth could move way faster than maybe a detached home without a basement suite in a not so good location. In a market like this, there becomes a bigger gap in how the different property types are performing. So yes, the market is sideways. It looks like it's going to continue that way into 2026, maybe with a slightly downward trajectory, but it doesn't mean that the market will be dead. The market is active, and I'd say the main key takeaway, something that we have learned from 2025, is that in a sideways market like this, the money is not made in appreciation. It's made in negotiating and getting good terms and a really good price. And then to close it all off, 𝐎𝐓𝐇𝐄𝐒 said that BC is in the 4th year of a real estate downturn and that corrections usually last 5 years. So yes, corrections are very rarely a straight line. You're going to see small rallies, seasonal changes, and then just neighborhoods and product types behaving differently. So for everyone that is waiting for the bottom of the market, you won't notice the bottom until you're looking backwards. The key indicators that you need to look out for are sales volume. The key indicators that you need to look out for are sales volume, months of inventory, and days on market, because these are the things that usually change before prices do. So the key takeaway is leverage is shifting and it will continue to shift in 2026. This is where, smart deals happen. Right now, it's not about the hype. We're going back to the real estate fundamentals. And if 𝐎𝐓𝐇𝐄𝐒 is true, a 5-year downturn, and if 𝐎𝐓𝐇𝐄𝐒 is right, how corrections usually last around 5 years, we're coming towards the end of it. This is a really good time to start planning because if things are going to pivot, they're going to happen and you need to be ready for it. So catch you on the next video. Peace.